Let me go back to the clone question about how does it work. And the VDI question is that's gets asked dozens of times, and there's 30 different ways to do that. There's connection brokers, there's View, there's the traditional models. The idea of being able to quickly clone and provision VMs en masse is really, that's the key feature here. The upstream features of, if you want to use a sysprepped image is going to apply a computer ID and a name based on MAC address. That's a feature that you can leverage a product for. As far as being able to quickly create and clone, let's get a snapshot here, VMs. It's just going to take a few seconds, and that's it. So you have your gold image, whether it's running or whether it's powered off. At that point, then you can power it on and give it the unique ID that your environment requires. But it's a few seconds to clone once you've got the image installed and deployed. So that's the idea of having instant clones that you can either manipulate, export.
Tell me more about
send offsite.
Why is it a few seconds? What do you?
That's a function of the storage layer. So
right.
You'll hear a lot more about that.
You control all that. Oh, you're going to get to that.
Yeah, and it doesn't actually have to copy any data, essentially. Right?
Metadata updates.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that a small enterprise might like to do, and I've seen this a lot, is they want to buy virtual appliances like a Kemp load balancer. Are you planning to support those things, or are you trying to, or do you have native compatibility with those virtual?
It's really a matter of getting involved with the biz dev guys at those appliances and those companies, because there's this market segment. It's rural electric and rural utility co-ops, and there's two big software vendors that provide VMware appliances for that, and that's the only supported path. Now, it's easy enough to convert an OVA and make it run here. It's just commodity x86 virtualization. But the problem is that it's getting on the vendor's HCL and making sure that they support KVM. And that's, as every day and every week passes and we progress and the market develops, there's no longer that FUD that surrounds KVM. So that's being adopted.
But you have something different than KVM, right?
Well, KVM is our core. It's our core hypervisor.
So if I ran a Kemp load balancer on KVM successfully, can I assume that you're going at scale?
Absolutely. Yeah. The issue is if you would have to contact the vendor and they would be pushing you about, well, what's your hypervisor and platform? Then they may just wash their hands. So that's the challenge. So that's the time it takes to clone, and you can start powering these on and configuring them. So as far as replication goes, that's always that semantic discussion about how do you define DR or BC or replication. Are you protecting the guest or are you protecting the files? And there's needs for both. And sometimes you have to. I can save my environment by having VM protection. I can't always save my users from themselves, so I need to have a backup tool for the files, and that's where any existing agent-based deployment. So if you're using Symantec or Acronis or Unitrends or something, Aperture, it's an agent-based solution that you're backing up to cold storage somewhere, and that's going to work just like it would in any other VMware environment. So that's protecting the files inside the guest. As far as protecting the VMs themselves, though, as Kelly pointed out, you can export those. You can also import them in the same fashion. So if you had a copy you exported 2 weeks ago and you need to pull that image out, it's easy enough just to put the path, name, domain, pull it off of an SMB, so share, and it's back up and live. So there's no storage configuration. Again, you're just inhaling that VM and we're deploying it for you. But replication, as it works today, is going between two clusters. So we set up a SSH and encrypted tunnel between the two clusters. That, again, going along with the simplicity model, is just a matter of adding in an IP address. So I already have set up the second cluster. And now, if I want to take my initial phone that I haven't done anything before, replication setup, and the idea is to eventually have a hosted cloud-based offering for a replication target. So your VMs could be replicated to us. we could store those and act as your remote cluster. Just mitigate some of the cost.
Or for some of our other too, like say a managed service provider. They've got the capability to, like you could have your cluster, you could deploy these little 3-node systems at your customers, and you could be effectively their replication and backup target for those guys.
Can you schedule that replication too? Or do your customers not really need that?
It's a continuous replication, so it's not really scheduled. So I clicked Setup Replication, picked my target cluster, and the first thing it did was it took a replication setup snapshot. So it's taking a snapshot and getting everything it needs to over to the target cluster. And from that point on, just the block differentials, anything that changes or anything that happens on that VM, as it changes and evolves, you update it, it's a SQL box, you're writing to it, that gets pushed across to the replication cluster.
So your replication model supports 1-to-1, 1-to-many, many-to-one, is that correct?
1-to-1.
Just 1-to-1?
We can do, I mean...
I've got remote branch offices and I want to have them back up to a centralized location.
Yeah.
Because I'm small, but I'm robo.
Today, but the next couple of iterations, that's going to expand out.
Okay.
So. Yeah, it's you can do it today, it's just not supported.
This is effectively our first kick out of the replication component. So
hideout messages. So
that especially applies when I think of your small credit union.
Yeah.
You've got your main location where you've got like the 8-node 4000 series, and then you throw 3-node 1000 series at all of your branch offices.
Yeah, it's a perfect use case for it.
That's the
perfect use case.
You've seen it 1,000 times,
Yep.
At least 1,000 plus times.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that cross-replication model.
You guys fit into a point-of-sale model yet?
That's a good question. We've got a few. I know we have a few customers who use it as a POS backend, and I couldn't tell you what software they're
like
using.
A back office like scenario.
And we got a couple that are using like Epicor and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's so pervasive in the market.
From an IO perspective,
You said Epicor?
Can be
Yeah.
Epicor's recommendation is an info out the box sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, in the larger Epicor installs, like, we're just like, ain't going to touch it with a 10-foot pole kind of thing. But, that said, there are, like I said, some of the exciting things we've got coming when you've got basically, the capability of putting like an SSD or two into a cluster, and then, basically it takes a lot of that contention out. So
I'm replicating to my target cluster here. And this, just like you saw, this is a different cluster. This is cluster, this is the Vader cluster, and there's Collier's VM that's being, at this point, hydrated from the initial snapshot.
So do you guys offer a service to be a replication target for these end users as well?
That's part of what I'm trying to get developed and we're working on.
Okay, so that is going that route. I mean, that's obviously the next step.
For our market, that's awesome for our market, right?
Or I can do it.
Is it doing an instance object fingerprinting so that way you're not replicating all of the data when it comes to replicating to the remote location?
He's going to go deep into it.
And a secondary one, semi-related but unrelated, and you'll probably go into when you talk about Scribe is, do you have some type of QoS or QoS policy when you do add flash drives to an existing, otherwise spinning disk array?
The design supports that, yes, but we don't. That's essentially our tiering feature that's coming out later this year. We're going to allow that sort of identification of hot blocks and things like that.
The fingerprinting side of things, as far as when I go to replicate two Windows Server VMs to the other side, does it treat those like I've never seen this data before? I'm going to replicate all that data for the first time, incomplete?
So the first time you replicate, yes, you send all the data. Right. If you clone that VM1 to another VM, it just sends the differences.
So if I replicate VM1, it sends 50 gig of data.
Right.
If I replicate VM2, that's very similar. Does it send 50 gig of data? Or
if VM2 was cloned from VM1.
Yeah, like right here. So
there's no deduplication. It's not
right. It's its own VM, but they have to have been cloned from the same lineage, essentially, which is how we identify that. Because
it would be a complete new write of data if I stood it up separately from the ground up.
From the ground up, then it would be,
That's the exact same VM, but I
right.
set them up manually.
If you installed them separately, completely independently, then yes, then it would copy the entire VM.
There's no fingerprinting capability where it detects on the point.
Right, like we aren't doing deduplication, so we're not like, checksumming all the blocks and saying, oh, this block is already over there. No, we don't do that.
So
genealogy is the perfect analogy for it, because it's all the parent object of this was all this was all the original Collier that was then cloned, and now I'm replicating both of them. So very little is going to have to be sent over between these two because they were generated from the same parent VM.
Can I ask just a
Restoration, is it file level? Is it?
This is at the VM, so we're sending the entire VM over. So if you needed to recover a file, it would just be a matter of cloning the VM, powering it back on, making sure to disconnect the network if you need to, but then, get whatever you needed out of that clone VM from the snapshot an hour and a half ago, and then powering it off. So
what's your how many nodes per cluster?
8.
8.
Yeah.
We support 8. We can go up to 16.
Yeah, and if you think about an 8-node HC4000 that would have, if you max it out with 256 gigs of memory, that's a pretty sizable deployment for the curve of our market.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
If I buy the 2000 and I expand out to 8, and I'm like, gee, it'd be really nice to get more. Could I get like 4,000 nodes?
You can mix and match nodes from any of the series. You can start out with 1,000. You can add 2,000s into it, add 4,000s into it. You can basically mix and match any of the nodes together.
Nice.
Yeah, there's no the 1000s you really want to keep together just because you're keeping the drive families together as being SATA, SAS to SAS. But
Now, what about CPU model architecture? I mean, is it able to?
Yeah, we can live migrate between any of the CPU
But I mean, if I add
in the
additional
nodes
capacity in, is it going to be the same CPU? I mean, be able to live motion over, vMotion over, without shutting them down. Not that they're going to care that much about it as much, but
that's one of the advantages of the KVM architecture. Actually,
Yeah, it's not
it
dependent
does
on that,
really
right?
it does really good at doing that that live migration component.
So we don't need an EVC type thing from VMware.
No. Yep.
So I could use that if have this gear for a long time to say, well, I actually want to go up to a bigger node and have, because I don't want to, I've got 4 or 6 and I go, I'm growing pretty well, business is good, I'm going to max out my 8-node cluster. It's like, well, I'll buy a 2,000 or a 4,000 and I'll just start rolling VMs over.
We have a ton of customers that take, let's say, one particular customer I'm thinking of, like Mike from Hydrodyne, who's basically in Houston, Texas. He started out with the 1,000 series. He expanded that to like 6 nodes of 1,000. He's like, well, I want some 2,000s. I'm going to go ahead and add those into the cluster. Now I want to go ahead and, let's say, I want to decommission those 1,000s. I want to move those to my DR site and use those as DR. So we can basically add and remove nodes pretty effortlessly within the system.
So
it's very modular in terms of doing that.
What if I have my own old cluster, a virtualization cluster, can I put your software on it? Do I have to buy the hardware from you?
You have to buy the hardware from us because we want to provide that user experience, because we effectively see ourselves as like we sell iPhones, right? But we don't sell an iPhone without iOS, right? So the reason that we sell it in the appliance form factor is to get a good customer experience, right? It comes in this nice like shiny box, and you unpack it, you get it racked, but it's just really that user experience of not having to basically install the software and those components. So
yeah, that's.
Because obviously many applications, and I will call them crapplications, have support models that they only support VMware or Hyper-V.
Yeah.
Do you have plenty of, especially in the SMB market, which have some funny apps which just go, oh, we're not supported on KVM? It'll work.
It very rarely does it happen. We expect it to happen more than it actually does. We got, we're like, in car dealerships where they're running what the hell's the name of that app? I don't remember what it is, but it really always ran great on AS400, and then they ported it to Windows and all that, and then they don't even support it in virtualization. Majority of the SMBs, they don't really give a crap.
Yeah.
Right?
So is that actually an SMB thing where they're not as panicked as the enterprises, and they're willing to wing it a bit more?
Yeah, they're a little more cavalier with that. And the other part of that is
Oracle and their support policy on like anything virtualized, right? They're like, we'll support it great as long as it's run on Oracle virtualization, right? We have a ton. We have specifically one of our VARs in the UK has built his entire business about deploying Oracle applications on scale, right? And do they support it? No, but they call the VAR whenever they've got problems with the application anyway.
Yeah, so SMBs are used to having, you call Microsoft, and you get support.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you have some sort of P2V, and on top of that, what about customers who already have some sort of virtualization and want to migrate over to scale?
Any X to V, Hyper-V, physical VMware. We have both tools to migrate workloads, whether they're running or offline, or we have services to do that as well. So, you could even manually convert them if you wanted to, and get it up into a QCOW2 format and just import it into. I mean, there's a lot of ways to tackle that tool, and that's we had to develop those services and those tools as we ran into a lot of first-time virtualizers or people who were at that licensing precipice and didn't want to go off the leap and pay 4 times what they were paying for enterprise. So once they hit that licensing threshold, yeah, those tools, and it is a lot of first-time virtualizers, but it's also a lot of people who are on an incumbent platform and they need to move that workload over.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of customers that are coming up on basically license renewal on VMware, and they're not happy, or they're getting ready. Like I said, they're switching from that tier, going from Essentials Plus to now I need to go to the enterprise licensing model, and the reality is they can get in a cluster cheaper than what it's going to be for them to up.
The other thing about whether it's the question about a software only offering or the fear of not being on a specific HCL. That's part of the reason I think our support score is as high as it is we own the whole stack, so we support the whole stack. So there's no need for the customer to call.
Pointing, right?
Yeah, they don't call though. So they call us and we provide the fulfillments.
At the same time, SMBs reuse hardware like crazy.
Yeah, they do.
They're a detriment at times, and
a lot of times this is the first new hardware purchase they've had in 5 to 7 years.
But if they have an old VMware cluster that's 2 or 3 years old, you're saying you're going to replace it with that. It'd be nice if they could reuse the old one.
Well, with some
kind of program to.
In terms of DR, if they didn't want to buy a second cluster to use replication, we have a partnership with a company called Double Take Availability and Move. They're our workload migration. So, yes, Vision Solutions. So you could easily leverage availability to, provide similar functionality. You have to install agents, but it's a software-based solution that allows us to be very agnostic to who we're replicating the VMs to. So whether you want to take your old Hyper-V cluster or ESX cluster and forklift it and make that your DR, we have a lot of customers who are in that situation that they don't want to lose that investment. Maybe it's even still on the books.
Coincidentally, Dave Demlow, who's our VP of product management, was the CTO for Double Take for years. So
again, is that backup or DR?
That can be.
I consider that DR. I don't consider that backup. I consider backup being able to extract the file out. I consider DR being I'm recovering from a disaster. I need to have access to the whole VM, and regardless of.
Can you run that VM then on the other side?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean whether it's using us or using availability, and you're going to an ESX cluster.
We do have a multitude of deployments where we have went in, basically to an entrenched VMware environment and basically use the HC3 availability product because they didn't want to. Effectively, they didn't want to rebuy that same VMware infrastructure to put in the DR center because of the cost, right? So they effectively did, they bought the licenses for the HC3 availability product and then basically run that on top of our stuff so they can actually just do direct kind of DR on that.
With a conversion in the middle.
Yeah.
So, but are there any desktop brokering or backup tools that you can use with KVM to actually broker VIs or actually backup to?
In fact, now why am I drawing a blank? But we've actually done a bit of testing with Dell's, through the I believe through the Case acquisition. The what is
vWorkspace?
The Quest? vWorkspace. Yeah. Okay. So we've done quite a bit of testing with that. In fact, as we were I think we had one of the 5 FX2s that existed in the world, and we showed it off at Dell World, where it was effectively running scale, and then basically kind of our next phases of where we can go with that is like running effectively vWorkspace and using that as like a slip-in VDI. I mean it's not productized, nothing like that, but it's I think
it's not in the product now, right?
Not in the product now.
Oh, okay.
Yep. We get asked about it a lot, though. I will tell you that. Like even Workspace, because we get a lot of guys. They're like, "Hey, I got 20 VMs I need to virtualize, but hey, I got like 50 to 100 users in here. Can I just run virtual desktops on there?" The reality is you can do it, but we don't specifically offer any brokering services. But I think through some good strategic partnerships, I think that's something that we can offer.
Plus, you may not even need a broker.
Right. I mean,
you just use RDP.
I use RDP. I use RDP on mine. I actually do a weekly, like kind of a weekly demo, and in one of them I'm actually RDP'd into a VM that's running on the cluster that I'm hosting WebEx on, that I'm then live migrating all over the place. While I'm on the machine that's hosting the WebEx webinar session, right? So they're fun things you can do with virtualization, right? But yeah, I mean, and the RDP, especially with remote FX, works great. Right, but it's then just managing. Then it's just managing.
I suppose the broker is two bits. One is the protocol, the remote FX, whatever Citrix and VMware protocols. But the other is the brokering part that then creates and manages all those kind of VMs. But generally, the shops you're in on maybe.
I mean, remote FX is probably enough, right?
Shared desktops. With all the enhancements in 2012 R2 for their RDS, there's a lot of problems that get solved for our market that they don't need a formal or the sophistication of a broker. They can leverage RDS as a tool to do remote desktop. And
But do you have customers who, because the display protocol is one thing, but the actual, I'm trying to think, the provisioning piece of what a broker also does, of having shared desktops or the pool that you can connect to, variable ones.
Right.
Do people care, or?
Not because at this point we have a customer who's probably our third largest, and this was just a choice on their part, but they do VDI, as they call it, by having 164 workstations. They have 164 Windows 7 VMs, and everyone remote desktop. That's their VDI deployment. So would a broker simplify things like that? Yeah, probably, but the cost and complexity, even for the size of their user base and the size of their company, they didn't want to go down that path and have to.
But my question was more like all the products, they connect to a hypervisor or a vCenter, or and KVM is most of them not part of the backup applications or the brokers or.
Right.
vWorkspace. We looked at vWorkspace and we figured it'd probably be about 2 weeks of engineering effort to basically make it work great. Where it's doing things like cloning and basically going through and doing that deployment aspect. So, I mean, it could easily be built to support it. Like I said, I think it just comes down to like strategic relationships for us and developing those.
Yep.
Yeah, the agent-based solution for backup and file level protection and app level protection, because Aperture, Unitrends, Acronis, they all have agents for SQL and Microsoft or SQL Exchange, and they can cover most of those tier 1 apps, and that's the solution that they can leverage without having to. There's no need for them to talk to the hypervisor, and not that there isn't cool things you can do by having an API, and KVM certainly does, but we don't expose it. But for our customers' needs, using an agent-based solution is covering what they want out of protection.
But a VM level backup is not possible now. Or?
Well, that's what you can do with replication. So we're replicating the entire VM, but if you want to offshore it to anything other than, you could easily schedule exports of a VM on a daily, hourly basis to go, export a snapshot.
Multiple copies of the same VM.
Then there's nothing
like.
or it's not leveraging our thin clone technology. So you have to either use, if you wanted to reuse your existing stack, use availability to do that, or look at a export process. Or
are you guys talking to backup vendors to support some kind of
been the other part of what I've been spending time with, is developing relationships with our going beyond just a marketing alliance and having a more technology partnership.
Once again, I will point out we're 75 people.
I can understand that, but backup is an important part.
Oh, absolutely.
I suppose in your
absolutely, it's like one of the number one things.
With something like OpenStack increasing, which runs a lot on KVM, backup vendors are jumping to support OpenStack running on KVM as an option, which just feeds perfectly into them supporting you as well.
Yeah, I mean they're undertaking all the hard part and will benefit from it. So.
Can you? I saw that you had SMB shares available in there. Can you have a client desktop point to an SMB share on the shared storage?
No, the shared storage is all completely strictly for block storage. Yeah, it's for the VMs. The import and export that you saw was, we will push out the export of VM2 CIFS or and the SMB share that you can access. So you just pop in the credentials, and then the import process is the exact same, just in reverse.
Is there a tool to open those exports up? Like, can you look inside them?
When you export it to a share, all you're going to get is the domain XML file, so just the relevant config like a VMX would be, and the backing file of what was the VM. So QCOW2 is what we're using for the export process. So
and that can be used only to import into a KVM system, or?
Yeah, QCOW2 can be actually, I mean, it can be converted into pretty much anything. You can convert it into VMDK or whatever else you need to.
It's a fairly extensible format that you could convert for any hypervisor.